have the star of the show all ready to go.
And you are now live.
Okay. It hasn't come up yet on my screen.
It is showing up on mine, so I think you're okay. And I just saw it pop up on YouTube, so we are good to go.
All right, so this is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing work on the 2022 budget. For the rest of the afternoon, as scheduled, we're going to have a run through by Stephanie of the highlights of what the House has done and recommending in their version of the big bill for this FY 2022. And so Chrissy had sent out documents, including the bill itself, as well as the highlights of what is in the bill. And Stephanie we're not going through section by section, I can assure you, but really to run through the highlights and just to give us some context for when we do get the bill. So thanks, Stephanie. You're muted though. There.
Are we going to do the overview?
I'll do the overview, but before we go to the documents, either the highlight document or there's a comprehensive one-time list that also got sent out in that email that Maria put together, because that's where most of the money action is in the bill, is in that one-time list. But before we do that, number one, you might hear some pounding in the background. For me, I have a carpenter on the other side of the wall working on something.
Nice.
I'm glad you told us. I was afraid it was your frustration level with us.
But in the back of the budget bill coming out of the House is the second year of Pay Act. We often end up with Pay Act in the bill, but last year we bifurcated Pay Act, its first year and its second year. And so the second year of Pay Act is in the back of the bill, basically updating the statutory pieces to reflect the second year action, funding it. And there is a section in that Pay Act that allows the one-time payments around, I don't know if folks realize that there was a handful of exempt employees that did not get the increase in July under Pay Act. That was just a decision related to, these are the higher paid exempt employees. And the administration made a decision that they could actually fund them within the budgets that exist now. And so it allows that one-time payment to go out to these higher exempt employees, particularly impacting the judiciary, where the judges and a few other of the top executive people were not impacted. So that's the Pay Act part of the bill. And we'll go through that when you actually do the walkthrough of the bill. But it's a little unusual for the Pay Act to be in the bill when it comes from the House to the Senate. That's never really happened before. It usually gets combined in conference.
How much is the tab on that?
The general fund tab is 11.3 or 4, and then there's a $4 million piece in transportation. We estimate the amounts. We don't actually appropriate the amounts for federal funds and special funds.
Right.
Those pieces are in there too, and they reflect the contract negotiations from last year for the second year.
Okay.
So that's the last several pages of the bill is that Pay Act piece. Sorry about that.
How do we know that's not somebody she walled up in a spare room somewhere?
That's Jane's head pounding.
I think so.
We can walk. I think the highlight sheet is sort of the first place to walk through, because the one of the main things that the House did is they set up in one section of the bill, and I don't know if Chrissy wants to put it up on the screen or if people would just want to on other.
Would you like
mean the highlights?
Highlights, yeah.
Okay, committee, do you want to have it put up on the screen or do you have it? I have mine right here, but if you want it to be put up, Chrissy can do it right now.
Okay. Would you like me to go ask him to see if he can stop for a while?
Well, no, if it gets worse, but no, we don't want to.
Okay.
Okay.
There's sort of an overview at the top of the highlight sheet, but in the middle of this document is sort of a framework for $650 million of the $1.05 billion state fiscal recovery pot that's in the ARPA legislation. So when you passed out H315, you spent about $64 million of this pot. You appropriate about $64 million out of this pot. This has 5 or 6 broad categories that they're saying that they want to dedicate this money to. The action in the bill realizes some of these pieces. And it's are clearly.
I know, Stephanie, you're having a hard time. Can you just take your iPad and go up?
Maybe that's the thing to do. Maybe I'll if you don't mind, I'll go into another room and see if it's better.
Okay.
I'll do this from my iPad instead of from the desktop computer.
Okay, because one time I think you were upstairs and by the eaves or something, and that worked.
I'll do that. I'll run upstairs because I think that'll put me out of the way. And so I'm going to log off from here and log back in. So I'm going to leave the committee for a moment and log on to the other device.
All right.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So is the 100,000 is no, it's 100 million.
Yeah.
Is the 100 million for information technology the same? Would it be added to the 150 million for broadband, or is that
no? Information technology would be a replacement. For example, like education came in and had some IT projects. I think DMV's would be for those kinds of systems, either replacement or modernization. The governor had on his list of one-times, remember we started out with about 211 million of general fund as a result of the upgrade for this year. On that list, he had allocated, this was his list, 51 million to go in. He wanted to create a new fund, a technology fund, and use 51 million of general fund for these projects. What this is doing is saying, use federal money, and instead of the 51 with the additional money, make it 100 million. So I imagine what this is doing is it is not using that general fund approach that the governor originally presented as part of his budget, simply because that was before the ARPA money became available.
Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hello.
Hi.
It's a little better. You might hear a little drone in the background, but not right next door.
Okay. So we'll go back to the list. Are these, this is the framework. Did they actually appropriate the money for this?
So they actually, they appropriate in this bill and in the broadband bill, $264 million as appropriations. And then on top of that, the $100 million that is in this framework for clean water, they transfer those dollars from ARPA to clean water. And those dollars will stay in the clean water fund and be expended over the course of 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So through the period of time for the ARPA funds. So that
would be in addition to all the general base funds that's going in for clean water.
So part of the construct of the clean
Or
water
is it swapping?
This is a bit of swapping to make the general fund base work.
Okay.
So it's dedicating a lot of upfront money to clean water. And for a period of time, it is redirecting clean water, rooms and meals tax back to the general fund to help with the general fund base. Yep. And then when in the timeframes aren't exactly matched up, it's a 5-year swap of funding to be roughly equivalent funding. Or
Mhm.
actually, it's not quite equivalent. There's still more money in ARPA than there is in the swapped out general fund.
So I assume this is freeing up general fund. That's why they're
It is.
using it toward pensions, for example.
Yeah. Well, it's,
Okay.
it's actually was to help sort of cover for several years the base of the general fund. The
Oh.
pension piece is basically one time. So it's a little bit of a,
Oh, it's not one-time money, it's two-time?
well, it's the clean water is, the clean water revenue is being swapped out for 5 years, I believe. And the clean water ARPA it has to be spent by the end of 2024. So,
We have 3 years.
Yeah.
Three.
yeah,
All right, so it's not one time or two-time, it's three-time.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
But
that,
the main thing to remember is that it's not an ongoing revenue.
it's,
Okay.
it's a multi-year cover of the base, but there will still be base pressure once the ARPA money is fully sort of absorbed on the clean water side, and the revenue has to go back to the
Mhm.
clean water program.
Okay.
So of this 650 million that they're putting into this framework, they've appropriated 264 million, and they've transferred that $100 million. So there's $364 million that they have sort of assigned or both appropriated or allocated specifically.
So the 100 million, is that the IT 100?
So
million?
they
Or the
the
clean
framework
water?
has a-
I'm getting confused with which
So the-
100.
so the 264, so the IT $100 million is an allocation.
Uh-huh.
Within the 264 million that they are appropriating,
Yeah.
they've appropriated $62 million of that $100 million. So
So where's
so
the
the-
other 38 going?
it's just waiting to be appropriated. It's not going anywhere. It's just sitting in the ARPA fund.
Okay. All right. Uh-huh.
So what's hard to understand a little bit is that this is a framework for 650 million of it. Some of it is appropriated, some of it is yet to be appropriated. And it's a little unclear, like there, of the $264 million of appropriations of ARPA money in the bill, 62 is IT, 150 is over in the broadband bill. The remaining money, the largest part of that is there's money to the state colleges. So it's not quite defined yet whether or not some of the other ARPA appropriations are in this framework or in the money that's outside of this framework. That's a little as yet undefined.
So Stephanie,
Okay. Yes,
Um,
Philip.
the 250 million for investments in health and well-being, families and small businesses.
Yeah.
We usually don't talk about health and well-being of families and business in one construct. That seems like it encompasses just about everything. How did they view that particular category?
I don't have a lot of insight into that. It's what the House decided on in terms of this framework.
So is this
think
what they've just set aside in their 650, or did they appropriate any of it? And then I'll go to
So that-
Senator Westman.
So we haven't said anywhere in the bill that this appropriation is part of the 250. I mean, there's a lot of alignment in sort of making sure when they get H315 back, they have a lot of appropriations that are similar to the appropriations the Senate has in H315. And so some of those have to be sort of aligned and understood where they fall. Do they fall in this 250 or do they fall in the $400,000 that's not part of the framework?
Okay.
That's what's not really clear yet. But in terms of phrasing that,
Well, I thought they'd passed this out.
they have passed the bill out with this framework in it, but they haven't identified where every appropriation falls in the framework.
That's good, Jane. They left that for us.
Okay. Well, this is a bit unusual. Senator Westman, you had your hand up.
So first off, the Clean Water Fund, I understand that most of this is a swap out. The Natural Resources Committee is going to ask me, is there any new money in that? But that brings up the overall question on it. How much of this is all just appropriated? How much of this is swapping out in preserving general fund dollars? Is there a bottom line here someplace?
So the main swap out for the general fund is that clean water piece. The others are actually one-for-one appropriation decisions. So the governor proposed to do an appropriation in general fund, and the House is probably deciding to make the appropriation out of this fund. So it's not a swap the way the revenue is a swap in clean water. The clean water is very clearly a swap of one type of revenue for another type of revenue.
Okay,
So-
but I think what Rich is asking is how much of the 100 million is off the table because it's just simply a swap out, and what would be left to assist water and sewer. Although I would think municipalities, if they have 175 million, they might be able to finance some, but depends on how much each town gets for an allocation. That's the other big thing.
Yeah, and that's true. What we heard, well, and you don't need to hear this, what we heard about sewage treatment plants is there's a lot of upfront work that needs to happen because towns aren't ready to go. And if we could help with some of that, that would encourage them to put their own money in to follow it with the money that you're talking about.
How
But
much does a sewer system upgrade cost?
they're very expensive.
I know, like,
And we're going to be spending more time in natural resources in that. But in the overall, Stephanie, I somewhat get the framework you're talking about, but what are the broad dollars? That's a straight swap out. And then some of the rest of these swap out to create one-time funds versus the governor.
Those are pretty straightforward to understand, but like in the clean water, the rough swap out over the period of time is clean water gets $100 million to be spent sooner than it otherwise would have, because it's in that 3-year time period for roughly about $60 million of revenue over a 5-year time period. So that's
helpful. that helps a lot. And in the other piece, how much of that is a straight swap out of, say, the governor's mostly one-time funds?
Wherever they've made a choice to do the money the same way that the governor did, but with a different source of funds. It's just a straight, I'm going to use this pot instead of the general fund pot.
They're stacking
bottom line
it just like we did. Then general fund is your last dollar used. You would use.
And so what they were able to do by doing all that one-time general fund swapping is reserve 150 for pension reform, reserve another 40 million for housing. So that's an extra 20 on top of what the governor had. And then they've also put money, about 38 million, into a reserve to be determined. So that's how the 3 big chunks of general fund that they free up one time.
So about 220 million.
Yeah, which is equivalent to what the governor had.
Yeah,
in
okay.
total general fund.
I'm just trying to understand that, because yesterday I couldn't figure out when I read the House's proposal for retirement for state employees, where they got the 150, but this explains that.
Exactly.
But it's 150, 40, and another 30.
38, right now.
38 was for what?
Just reserved in the general fund.
Okay.
So it's really 228.
So it's reserved for, bringing forward into the next year, either budget adjustment, or if we get guidance from the federal government that some things have to get swapped back,
Okay.
that type of, it was leaving that sort of capacity on the table.
So when they were all done, out of a little bit more than $1 billion, how much has been set aside in broad categories and appropriated versus yet to be determined over this period of time.
So what's hard is the appropriated. So clearly 650 is in the framework and 400 is outside the framework.
Okay.
There is, easily in the 150 of the 264 appropriations and the 100 million in clean water, there's 200 to 220 that is clearly within the framework. And then the remainder may or may not be in the framework. We just haven't said it's part of this piece of the framework yet.
All right, Philip, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this is reminding me of the CRF money when all of a sudden we understood that in the House they had basically gone to different chairs and told them, you have X millions of dollars to think about. I'm just wondering what it benefits us to go along with the framework at all. I mean, that first 250 million is so broadly described, but it's clear what they want to do, which is say, okay, let's make an initial decision about where to put our proportions of our resources. But in a way, as you go down, that constrains the appropriations process, where the people who initially didn't get as much in their category are going to have less and less leverage, whereas the people who wound up in a category with more and more money are going to look for more ways to spend it. So I'm wondering, if we didn't go along with those categories, it seems like we would retain more appropriating power through the 3-year period. Is that off the mark, Stephanie?
So that is, I think, the consideration over the course of time. I think it's a choice of, does the framework help in sort of, if you are appropriating these dollars over time, does it help sort of shape the conversation over that period of time, or does it constrain you? And I think that's a choice each body will make. I don't, it's different than the CRF, because the CRF, when we were doing it last year at this time, we were thinking we had to get it out the door so quickly under that December timeframe. And so I think the reason that they're going this framework route is to sort of set up. I don't know that you necessarily have to
we don't have to be bound by it. This is what they did, but we don't, if we think it constrains future decisions. We did a different approach. We were sort of basically allocating X amount, and then we had things that we wanted to do that we appropriated, like the hazard pay. So we can take a look at it. It's basically a rough, an advance allocation of where a significant portion of this ARPA money would go. And you're right, it's just like with the CRF, we ended up doing some fine tuning, and we didn't always agree. I don't think unlike last year, where the speaker basically carved up and gave every committee something, and they all shall have money to play with, that it's hard to do it that way, because it doesn't set priorities against everything. Everybody was saying, well, this is my committee's pot of money and I'm going to use it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
If you were looking at all those needs, which we do in appropriations routinely, it locks you into something that you would say that may be nice, but that is doesn't rise to what we think should be the priority for what this money should be used for. So this is more not to agree to anything. This is just to get familiar with what the thinking of what's being proposed. And we obviously will have an opportunity to consider all of this.
And they clearly made a choice in making, taking 65% of it and putting that into a framework and leaving 35% or a little bit more than 35% outside of the framework too. So that's also a component of just what they have there.
Let me ask, in light of the ARPA money coming in, and we had the governor said we were spending it before the ink was even dry, and because we were moving forward on things that we thought were our priorities. did the administration advance any spending recommendations to the House relative to the use of ARPA money when they were building the budget?
I will double check. I don't think so, but I'll double check with Steve and Maria. I wasn't in all the, the conversations last week. I was sort of in the background trying to put things into the system.
And the reason I ask is people have talked about you can use it for capital. Dick, as in Sears, the thought was, well, maybe this is an opportunity to finally move and make progress on the women's prison.
Yep.
Other people are saying, gee, we need to make improvements, or maybe we should do something with state office buildings, or, so I was just wondering whether the administration had come forward with.
The only one that's
Yeah,
the only one that's come forward to me is the judiciary, and they have a 3-year kind of plan on it still needs some it's not yet ready for prime time, but it's
I think
about
they
13
didn't they put some
million.
money in? Didn't the House put in 1.6 million for criminal justice, including judiciary, state's attorney to meet budgetary needs? Would
No, I'm
that be?
talking a long-term, a 3-year plan for the judiciary.
Oh,
It's about $13 million to clear up backlog in cases to
okay, not capital.
not
This is-
capital, no. It's all, it would be temporary employees, retired judges, that sort of thing.
Okay, Senator Westman, you're muted though.
Oh, unmute. Stephanie, do you know, in this kind of getting at a little bit of what Philip is talking about, instead of blocking them out in figures, did they get any testimony or information in the broadband area and in the technology area about what can be spent over the next year?
I think they did actually use the 150 in a separate broadband bill.
They did.
But the question is, if you were going to, you wanted them to move ahead, how much broadband money can the CUDs and whatever other function is out there spend in a year?
Well, they
And-
can carry it forward.
Yeah, so they don't have to spend the 150 in a year. They have to spend the 150 by the end of the,
I
Sure,
totally
yeah.
get that,
Yeah.
but in the thinking that Philip just put out, do
Yeah.
we want to block out 150, or would we block out enough to get them through the next year, and we reserve that to make decisions as we go forward, because we don't have to make all those decisions up front.
A lot would depend on what the rollout plan requires. And if in fact, the second year is well thought out, there are advantages of putting a fence around that money. If we agree that that broadband is right there at the top of the list, which everybody who's run for public office has said it is. So,
Well,
but it's the choice.
I understand that, but it does get at, there is validity into what Philip says about reserving certain pots instead of just appropriating it all up front.
Or maybe we take, for instance, maybe broadband is a category, we agree with them and we agree to fence that off. But yeah, Richie's got what I'm trying to say, which is if it's an ARPA fund that we appropriate out of, to me, that seems to preserve more options than to agree to 5 sub-ARPA funds that are limited to those subjects.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
and doing it all up front. You do dole it out over the time.
the one advantage of if you want to make something a priority and you've got a price tag that you feel fairly confident that it gets you to an agreed upon goal, there are advantages to putting a fence around that money. If you don't, then it's open for competition and at risk for the second year or third year. So that to me is all the discussion we've got to have in terms of how we want to approach it and whether, in fact, after we agree, if in fact we say, gee, we've got a plan and we want to fund it a multi-year, we just fence that off and then allow the rest to be sort of undesignated. I'm not sure exactly what that framework might lead to expectations that would lock you into decisions or create the impression that the money is not in that area that subsequently we might decide needs to go somewhere else.
See,
So the question comes in with the 150, what's the number based on?
Well, I think the House has their own technology committee, and we will have to understand that better. But I know that they've spent a lot of time, and they have the luxury of a committee dedicated to really looking at it. I think it probably deals with everything from the state-owned fiber that we had. Remember when Vince put that line in? The CUDs want that to be used. I don't know whether the bill would include the Washington Electric proposal if they, finance the money because they can do it cheaper as a utility, and they want an exemption on the poles and the wires that otherwise would be taxed because they're a utility, but the CUD is a municipality and therefore wouldn't be. I think that they've spent a lot of time in-house technology on that.
I'd like to understand that piece better. I don't
And
want to
even know.
numbers out in.
Well, we obviously will have to have that. I don't know whether that bill has been passed yet.
Yeah.
And, I think, when's the governor going to drop his list on us? Because the other day I was visiting with Anson, and it sort of rolled out of him that he's put a list together from the governor's request of things that they might be able to use a bunch of money for.
Yeah,
So-
I know that every agency's been asked to identify those needs. So
When
that's
that
why I
comes-
asked whether anything had been presented to the House, but obviously not. They haven't finished it yet. I'm sure that they will have it finished for our consideration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say from this that we have some reservations with this spending frame approach that in advance sort of allocates or suggests that there's certain desired buckets that we want to create. If there's certain priorities that rise to the top and there's a business plan and sense of money of what it would take to get to where we want to be, we would look at those appropriations within that light and make a decision. But at this point, we're just going to let Stephanie keep going. I
Yeah.
think my phone is ringing.
Okay.
So
So,
Stephanie,
Chrissy, if you put up the sheet again. So the middle of this sheet is that frame of the 650 million of the ARPA Corona state fiscal recovery funds. The next paragraph down is on the top general fund priorities, and I touched on those briefly, but it does free up most of the general fund that the governor had allocated, and 150 of it is for that reserve. It's not actually appropriated. All it is reserved for pension reform. It doesn't move out of the general fund until you do something with it, but it simply states that we're reserving it for this purpose. So we'll just carry it on the sheet from one year to the next if it's not assigned, at some point in future legislation. The $50 million is the $10 million that was in H315 for the fast start housing piece.
Yeah.
The governor's original $20 million for housing, and then an additional $20 million that the House freed up. So that gives you the total of $50 million for the housing piece.
I thought that was 52.
20, 20, and 10, I think.
Oh, I
You're
thought you said-
muted, Jane.
I thought you said 12, 20, and 20.
No, it's at 10 and you did 10 million in H 315.
Okay.
Jane, you're muted. Oh, maybe
Yeah.
you want to be.
Yeah, I guess I want to be. The House included the 10 million in 315. We agreed. That was not to be taken off the 20 that was being proposed that Gus said he could leverage to 80 million. So what we have is the 10 in H 315. And instead of the 20 as proposed by the governor, they added another 20 to make it 40. So it's the 10 in 315 and 40 more. So instead of leveraging 80 million, they're leveraging 160 million if that leveraging ratio continues for the other 20.
Just
Yeah.
to be clear, when you see the language around these dollars, which is $40 million when you see it in the bill,
Mhm.
they do allow up to $10 million of the 40 to be used on the conservation side.
Okay. All right. We'll keep going on this.
Okay, and then they did want to, once they had all their sort of accounting done in the general fund, they weren't intending to spend all the general fund. They did want to reserve some of the general fund capacity that they had freed up because there may be other needs coming up as we go through budget adjustment, and there may be things that we assign federal dollars to because we are doing this early in the guidance.
That may not be
calendar year.
permissible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the second page of the sheet, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this chart. This was just laying out over time, so you can see across the bottom of it the impact of both the baseline of federal funds changing from 19, the year before the pandemic, through 2021, and then the CRF versus the ARPA, which will stretch, into the next 2 and 3 years of federal state fiscal years 23 and 24, and halfway through 25.
Okay.
And I don't know if we want to walk through the points below or switch over to the other sheet, which is really where the one-time detail is. I was going to come back to the sort of the base issues. The main pieces in the base. This mixes base and one-time together. These bullet points.
I
The
was
main
going to
piece-
say this is
Yeah.
really confusing.
The main base pieces are in a couple of areas. They did a 2% increase for the designated agencies and specialized service agencies, as well as the choices for care folk in human services. They use some of the one-time money to help support the adult days. They made some choices, like they swapped out the one-time CHINS money that exists for the match on home visiting to base money. The other pieces in the human service area is they didn't do any, they put language in around the emergency housing to have a work group that basically solves this before we're done with the conference on this bill. But they did reserve part of the ARPA money and part of the rental assistance money. They've reserved it. They haven't appropriated it yet to get through 22 on the emergency. They've basically reserved $50 million to get through FY22 on the emergency housing side, which is how do we transition from what we have now in the hotels to a workable plan by the time we get to the end of 22.
Okay. They
those are the
know.
big-
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. There's work to be done on the housing piece. And when you're talking about rental assistance, are you talking about that 200 million that we accepted
I'm
in
talking
December?
about that 200 million, which is actually now probably $352 million. So it was 200 in December, and then
Mhm.
ARPA added another 152 on top of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So they did small amounts of base actions in other parts of the bill, but nothing terribly significant. They did add money to Defender General, almost $1 million to the Defender General. They addressed the state's attorney in the one-time ARPA money and they put a little bit of money into judiciary.
Stephanie,
And I think they backfilled some revenue pieces in the diversion program.
just out of
Philip?
curiosity, what was the rationale for the million for the Defender General?
They have a variety of different line items in both in the assigned counsel piece, which is a little over 500, a little bit more than half of it. The contract costs and some ad hoc needs.
Okay.
And then in the Defender General, the public defense line, some rollout costs for PAYAC that weren't covered by his allocation, and some of his public defense contract costs are being boosted
Can
up.
just since we're in that section, Stephanie, am I to understand that the Defender General is a base increase and the state's attorneys are one time?
That's what's in the bill right now. Yeah.
We're relying on you, Senator Sears.
Yeah, I
so-
know. I can see that. That's how we do this.
Mhm.
You know, and it's unfortunate because they both need base increase. Actually, all three need base increases. The Defender General, the state's attorneys, the crime victim services, as well as, and we've got a problem coming on these surcharges and fines where we've got state programs relying on them, and we're not collecting the money. Particularly the pandemic has really cut the revenue. So there's a lot of problems in this area that, and I wish they had. It's more than just. I don't begrudge the Defender General. It's just more than that, and that's unfortunate because.
Well, this is an ongoing discussion, and what it brings out is the fact that underneath this overlay of millions of federal dollars is still the reality of what our base revenues are once we get out of,
Yeah.
move out of here, and we have to see what we have to work with and how we want to prioritize them. So,
Well, one area will be I will hopefully have some suggestions regarding the sheriffs, state paid deputies.
yeah, okay. Hopefully we should
So-
have something on that. Should we
Yeah.
go on to the one times now?
Sure. Well, the two other pieces to mention in the base, just to pull them out, is they did do $5 million in the base increase for the state colleges. They did decide to run it as a new line item in the budget, in the base budget. So you'll see the state college base appropriation, and then you'll see a new $5 million line item that, the plan expects that it would grow by $5 million next year. And then the other piece in the base is,
What's the advantage of doing that?
I cannot tell you. I just know it was a decision that the committee made.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to ask you to
Yeah,
defend it. I just-
it just, it's a piece of change in the structure of the budget that we did make because the committee requested it.
It seems like something you would do if you were going to get rid of it later. Otherwise, you would just add it to the normal.
Regular appropriation.
Mhm. Well, that's a decision we can make.
So
And the last piece in the base is regarding the Community High School of Vermont and the Department of Corrections. So the governor had proposed doing that $3.33 million out of the ed fund. The budget funds that with ESSER money for 2 years. So it appropriates the ESSER 3 statewide money to the Department of Education, to the Agency of Education, and then it directs the Agency of Education to transfer that money over to DOC to cover the community high school, half of it in FY22 and the second half of it in FY23. So it allocates 6.7 of the ESSER money to cover 2 years of the Community High School of Vermont. So the conversation about how the Community High School of Vermont is funded comes back into play in FY24.
Isn't that, Stephanie, isn't that what you call the weird construct that we would appropriate money to an agency and then require them to spend it in a certain way? In other
Well,
words,
that you do that all the time. We don't tell them what to ask for usually,
Well-
but we tell them how to spend their money 1 year.
Well, I agree with the governor on this one.
I'm just, you remember what I'm calling the weird construct where?
Yeah.
Now, this is not weird. This is appropriating the money for 2 years. It's a straightforward.
It's when we say you agency shall tell the future governor what to put
To put in the budget.
Yeah,
Right, okay.
that's something we don't do.
No,
Okay.
but we're putting it in ourselves.
We're appropriating the dollars and saying that you do that all the time, appropriating
I know.
dollars and saying it
Yeah.
shall be used for this.
Okay.
And Senator Sears, we all agree, it was the House that had difficulty, but
Yep.
I guess using the federal money. The only thing is, I'm sure that they're using that freed up Community High School of Vermont general fund for something else. Maybe the increases to
Mental health.
mental health or the choices for care.
Or maybe they're using it to make up for the sports betting.
So that's
sections in
that's
the
a piece of
Keno
it.
section that
Yeah.
the governor
Yeah,
put in his budget. But it doesn't look like we're gonna do Keno and sports betting this year.
no, I thought they were using Keno to fund the childcare.
So that, but they were, that piece, those pieces of revenue are not in their general fund construct. And so
I know.
they had
So what did
little
they
less
do with
revenue than the governor.
childcare, Stephanie?
So there's a childcare bill and they roughly spent the same amount because the governor had increased spending he had proposed that increased spending in childcare with $3 million. And they do cover that in that other bill. So there are the pressures like the $5 million in the state college and the childcare piece, not having to make up that 3.3 million on the high school of Vermont meant less pressure on the general fund. So that's part of the reason they came up with the clean water construct, is to create that revenue on the top side of the general fund to help cover those pieces. And so that's the tension in the base is, we're talking about relatively very modest amounts of money moving in the base, but there's just not, unless you're going to actually really take out a base program or significantly increase base revenue, you're usually doing these marginal things like the clean water construct to make your base balance from 1 year to the next.
Yeah, we understand what they're doing. It's just whoever wants to be here in a couple of years is going to inherit some challenges.
They'll probably be,
What?
if you think they're complaining about the pension fund now, wait till they see this.
And then actually it reminds me of one other piece of in the base, part of the 2% coverage in the designated agencies for developmental services and the piece and choices for care, as well as the contract cost for the home care workers that runs in the choices for care and the developmental. Those are being covered. You see them as an add of the general fund, but then you see them swapped out for FMAP related to the 10% home and community-based 1 year bump in FMAP that is part of ARPA. It's a little arcane, but there's the federal government.
I know, but it's still a one-time slug.
Yeah, well, there's language that we put in that said because that base is bigger than, the amount that they're increasing, the 10% can generate a significant amount of money over a year. And to the extent that we can reserve that and stretch it out over time, we're seeing if we can do that with that 10% bump on the home and community base.
Well,
Yeah,
what's
you
the 10% bump get us?
We don't have a definitive number yet, but my calculation is we probably have around a $200 million base. So 10% applied to that would give you $20 million.
Yeah, okay.
To
The 7 Days has an interesting article about a woman who works at the Gatling House in Bennington, which is a part of the United Counseling Service, our designated agency facility. It's 4 or 5 beds that work with special needs adults. and during COVID, they were working, 24/7 basically, and getting paid $14 an hour, giving up Christmas and not being able to visit with family because they're such, they all had to share the same bathroom. They have to share the same, basically, it's a small building. And it's an interesting article about what these workers are putting in, and what they're getting back when they, $14 an hour, that just doesn't,
Right.
that, no wonder they
Well,
have a hard time getting staff.
One of the things I realize it doesn't help in the long run, but it raises a conversation about what we do, because designated didn't get an increase. It's been a couple of years since they got an increase, or the SSAs, whether, if we did if we gave them money to do like they did with state employees last year, just some kind of a one-time grant that doesn't build the base. That's something we could put on our list, recognizing that some of these systems that we've underfunded have really created very sympathetic situations like you talk about, and these people coming to work and the conditions under which, and the constraint to provide any. The DAs only have the money we gave them. There's no payer mix there.
Right, and they're struggling to hire people. Actually, all the human service programs in my area are really struggling to get people to work. At their, even some of them are paying $15-16 an hour. They're still struggling to get people to come to work.
Well, they're very difficult, depending on the acuity. And then some of the homes are the 248 individuals that can't stand trial because of level of intellectual functioning,
Right.
but they've committed horrendous crimes.
Yep.
Or then you've got homes. I know in one of my towns, it's a small facility where that population, they're serious sex offenders. So it's
Yep.
no wonder people are. You say, how could they even hire anybody
Right.
to take on some of the jobs?
What in our area, we have almost 200 jobs just in DCF group homes.
Really? Uh-huh.
Yep. That's amazing. The Beckett program is very large, as is CEOL has grown a great deal. So there's all competition for the same individuals, and the mental health programs have group homes, and
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Should we go to the one-time list? It's
I think that's
10:04.
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest we try to get done. It's been a long day. Some of us have met through lunchtime and.
Yeah. So the one-time list you have in your email, and it's a busy document, but I think it's useful for sort of understanding where things are in the bill, and then it gives you a sense of the level of detail. So the top gray box is that same framework we've already talked about. The next line down, that's B1101, technology modernization. There's the $62 million of projects that are appropriated in the bill for IT. So it's a list. That B1101, when you open it up, you'll read through a list of 10, 12 projects, or maybe a little bit more, that are funded in that $62 million, just about $62 million. And includes the labor projects, the integrated eligibility, to the extent that we can do that. But the assumption right now is taking a broad approach to the ARPA and saying we can use these for our technology modernization. It's not as clear cut as the broadband, which is clearly an allowed use. But
All right.
so that's what's happening in B1101. And then in B1102, this is the list.
And let me say, I guess that is a risk, depending on what ARPA does, because the governor was using 51 million of the general fund to do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought we had 100 million over earlier for.
They
So-
do.
so
We
that-
only
so the-
appropriated 62 of the 100 allocated.
Yeah, so they're allocating 100 to IT, and so far they've identified 62 million to spend it on. State IT modernization. Okay. And then in section B1102, you see all the individual pieces, and because we're getting close to 4 o'clock, I'm not going to walk through them, but they're all in the language of B1102. These are ARPA funded one-time appropriations. Some of them are similar or the same appropriation that we have in H315. So when that gets to conference, which bill it runs in has to be sort of figured out. You see the
Okay.
majority of it is in the state college, where there's over $61 million assigned to the state colleges. VSAC is a chunk of the money. It's $8 million. The weatherization pieces are in the one piece that's not funded out of ARPA in the weatherization package. You'll see it a little bit further down. Is the money that goes for the BGS municipal revolving loan fund. That one can't be done out of ARPA because you can't do ARPA into a revolving fund. It's clearly stated in the federal law.
What is the 61 million? Is it for, no, 20 million for statewide deficit caused by pandemic?
So that's the deficit piece at the state colleges. That's the governor's original $20 million. And then there's $20 million of one-time money for transformation at the state colleges. And that will be like 8 million will be used this year. And the remaining amount, the remaining $12 million will be over the next 2.5 years.
Okay, so
and then the 20.5 at the state colleges are specifically for workforce initiatives. And so we have the LPN piece of that in H315. And so what's not in any language is
Well,
exactly
we also have 4 million, 3 million to Vermont State College and 1 million to UVM for courses as well.
And so that's, I don't know if that ties more into the opportunity grants through VSAC or not. So that has to be resolved between the pieces that are in this bill on the House side and what's in 315 and what you will eventually have in your bill. What bills carry which pieces of this at which time, because H315 is all FY21 appropriation to be carried forward so they can get started.
Senator Westman, you've got your hand up.
So in total, when, in my little line, the state colleges came in and asked us for a total of around 80 million. The previous base, the one-time money, and all of what's the total amount that they did for the state colleges?
So they did that. They basically did that plus the 20.5 of workforce, because the workforce piece was not part of the state college ask initially. Yeah. So
they basically, in some form or another, met the request of the state colleges.
Yes. And they added this $20.5 million for these essential workforce initiatives specifically through the state college system.
Okay. Yep.
So you can see the pieces there.
Is that directing the money in a way that they can use to deal with that multi-year plan for funding?
Yeah, they
So
have
that's
20 million
what
for
the transformation piece
yeah.
does. And then the expectation.
No, I'm talking about the workforce training, the 20.5.
I think that's over a two-year plan. There's not actually language in this bill specific to that yet. There's just the money.
Okay.
So the various
think
pieces of the workforce plan are not spelled out in this budget bill from the House. There's just the appropriation that of this dollar to be used for these workforce initiatives.
All right.
So
Well, we'll obviously spend more time on that, understanding exactly what that does and whether it's over and above what we've we're talking about, or the workforce is what we have, the 4 million or 3 million is part of the 20.5, because 1 million is to UVM.
Actually, and there's one correction on this I think we want to make is that I think the Embrace money is coming out in a technical amendment tomorrow or today, because it actually ended up getting carried in their commerce bill as well, which is already passed.
Well, we have 500,000 in the fast bill.
Yeah. And so once you get to the fast bill, is the intent to do 2.5 or 2 million? You'll have to have all those types of.
Yeah, I think we would adjust downward the amount that we had advanced ahead so the program could keep going, but we'll see.
The last two on this list, the grants to adult day service providers and the mobile crisis, which is basically Rutland for 2 years. There's language in around those. They're allocated first out of ARPA, but to the extent, for example, that the adult days could be covered out of that 10% bump on the long-term care, we would prefer to do that. And then there's also an 85% match for any mobile crisis activity for a 3-year period on the FMAP. And so this fully funds 2 years of the mobile crisis in Rutland, but there's language that says if the FMAP 85% can cover it, switch the funding source from, and so there's that type of stacking again going on because we're still unclear of what can be fully covered under the federal bill. And then if we scroll up a little further.
Well, let me ask, with some of that money, that higher match or 3 years, when we did 315, there was a great, we had discussion and we put in language very specifically that at the end of it, there's no, that was for the case managers, each DA would get one. And we made it very clear that this in no way should be interpreted as a commitment for ongoing funding. We might want to look at some similar language with some of these funding areas because as you roll through this, it's obvious that 3 years from now, whoever's sitting around the table, there's going to be some very significant base challenges.
I would think so.
So I think the more we make it clear, although once something gets started, but it's sort of like treating these like a federal grant to say, after you figure out how you can incorporate this as part of how you do your business, this will help with in a project kind of a mode, but long-term, this money is not in any way a sure thing.
No.
Okay, it's 3:59 and we're down to.
So there's 5 million in the downtown fund. We're top of the next page. Let's just switch to that. There's some one-time transportation fund appropriations in the bill, but I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that. There are 2 transfers out of the general fund to other funds. One is to the environmental contingency fund. Half of that's going to be used for PCB testing in schools, and half of that is just for the normal environmental emergencies that arise to be funded out of the environmental contingency fund. And then $11 million is
now wait a minute, Stephanie, on that testing, I thought part of what we were trying to do, and there was a separate bill, and that is to go around and assess the school infrastructure, and rather than doing one-off testing, we would do, based on the age of the building, it might be PCBs, but it might be something else. So is that other bill?
That's not part of this bill. I think that's part of a different education bill in the House.
I think we just got it. Didn't we just get it referred today?
It just went to education.
But all this does is put the money into the environmental contingency fund. And it's to the extent that a school would be tested for PCBs, it would be A&R doing the testing. And this gives them the funding to do their testing work.
I guess my point is, are we limiting it? If it turned out to be testing for something else as in PCB, are we actually toxin specific?
I don't, I do think we say PCBs in the language of this bill. So we might need to, make sure that is consistent.
All right.
Shouldn't a school district pay for their own testing? I mean,
It doesn't
We-
matter. It's all gonna fall back on,
We,
it's all gonna
Um,
fall on the tax dollar. The question is which pocket you want to take it out of.
yeah,
and we,
this
but
is-
we keep throwing this money away. They'll spend every dime we give the schools anyways, and now we're gonna throw them another 10.
well,
So
but Bobby,
this is
the-
the environmental contingency fund in A&R. And
The
so
pro-
this is the fund that you only go to this fund when you have an environmental emergency to respond to, some sort of
Bobby?
testing or cleanup.
the problem is if you leave it to the districts, they won't test because they're afraid they'll get a positive result, which is what happened with lead. So this is a statewide program where we pay for it and we go out and conduct the tests and get it done, because otherwise we'll wind up with half the state not testing, which is, crazy, because then you got kids in districts where you have, a little more tight-fisted school board just won't do it.
Well, I'm looking at the clock and I'm gonna just keep going because all of these trigger, obviously much lengthier discussions.
And so the other piece here is these are the actual appropriations out of the special fund. These top two is $11 million out of the Brownfield Revitalization Fund. So this is the ACCD piece of the brownfields, not the A&R piece of the brownfields that you did in H315. So, and then in B1106 are a handful of one-time general fund appropriations, things that couldn't be done, or most of them were already in the governor's recommend. But like the body cameras remain in general fund. And then the state personnel pieces, along with the 53rd week of Medicaid. We have a 53rd vendor payment when we go through FY22.
We have that every year. Why is this, these are
this
out
is-
of one?
So 53rd week is not every year. 53rd week is every 7 years.
Yeah, I know, but I thought the payments we made into, to build the, so
So
we,
that's a transfer. So we cover that with, these aren't part of the 220 million general fund, because the 27th payroll and the 53rd week, those are covered by a transfer out of the reserve that we built up to cover it. So, but this is appropriating the dollars for it.
okay, all right, now,
Yeah.
I understand what this is, line is doing, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And then this is and then the 14.4 you've talked about in the past with Adam. This is the one-time general fund appropriation. It's normally baked into the base budget for the state employees' retirement piece. And then the $1 million for body cameras. Those are that's the total of the one-time general fund appropriations in FY22. And then you see in C100, there's a handful of additional general fund appropriations that are made upon passage of the bill. So in FY21, and this is where you see the $40 million for housing to VHCB. This is where they did $3 million for the VHIP program. They also funded, it's meant to be for 2 years, but they funded a match for a primary care nurse, the rollout of Act 155 last year. So they're taking $2 million of ARPA money and saying, take $1 million this year, $1 million in 23, match it, and fund the primary care nurse and primary care doc program for scholarships. And this is through BSAC.
Through VSAC, okay.
Yeah.
These are scholarships rather than loan repayment?
I think they're a combination. That's the
Because the
reason
loan
they're through
repayment,
BSAC.
usually loan repayments have been done through AHAC, but,
I think that's a combination of both.
okay.
That's
But
not.
I think
segregated.
I think VSAC can also do some of the loan pieces, the loan forgiveness or loan repayment pieces.
Okay.
And then the last part of this sheet are transfers. And so what you see is that in the first column is the total transfer amount from one fund to another. And then Maria's noted where it's what fund it's going to or from. So you can see that and what year it's coming in general fund. So, so the environmental contingency fund is out of the general fund. That municipal revolving loan fund is out of the general fund. They did backfill the E911 fund. They're doing it all in FY21, but they're doing 2 years of it. That's what the 1.8 is. And then the clean water fund transfers are in there every year. We appropriate first to the clean water fund, and then they transfer to the sub funds in ag and like in crisis. And the downtown transportation and capital fund that's a transfer always from the transportation fund. The transfer from the TIB fund to the debt service fund, that's in every year. And then you can see the backfilling in sections D103. These are all ARPA monies that are backfilling special funds that had revenue difficulty. And then in D103B, this is where a handful of transfers are being made from ARPA to other special funds. We talked about the Brownfield revitalization, the Clean Energy Development Fund, $10 million, and then additional money to the Downtown Capital Fund on top of the Transportation Fund that's appropriated. And then you see the $100 million to the Clean Water Fund as the last item. So this is a lot of information on this sheet, but it gives you all the one-time pieces of ARPA in general fund on a 2-pager, so that you can understand what pieces are moving where.
Okay. I think that's a good place to leave us. It's almost 10 after 4. Senator Sears probably looks like he's the most comfortably situated. It must be more than 70 in Bennington today. You're muted, Senator Sears.
75 the last I looked.
Oh my gosh. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've finished for today.